That morning, at the busy international airport, a young CEO stepped from her car, barely noticing the quiet man who had just driven her there. Just a plainly dressed man with calm, steady eyes. To her, he was just a temporary hire, a nobody filling in for the day. But mere minutes later, stepping into the exclusive VIP terminal, every soldier in that hallway snapped to rigid, sudden attention. They saluted that same unboastful driver in perfect unison, freezing the entire hall with absolute respect. Not a single word was spoken aloud. Just a silent salute. Madison Clark finally realized she had completely misjudged the humble man in the front seat. Tell me what happens when the person you just dismissed is actually a quiet hero an entire nation never forgot. The city was already moving fast by 5:30. Delivery trucks rolled through intersections, still wet from overnight rain. First commuter trains flickered like distant lights under the gray early morning sky. Over at Meridian International Airport, the corridors were already packed with suits dragging rolling luggage. Uniformed ground crew barking out instructions over their headsets. A military group moved through the terminal. They had that deliberate, quiet confidence of people who never rush. For Madison Clark, none of that background noise mattered. All that mattered was the deal. At 27, she had built Clark Tech Logistics from a tiny startup into a growing firm running supply chain operations for some of the nation's biggest commercial and government clients. You know the type. She wore her ambition loud, perfectly tailored, and without a single apology. That morning's massive meeting was with Hargrove Defense, the absolute most selective procurement partner in the entire national defense sector. Winning this contract would double her revenue, putting Madison on those elite lists that rarely feature 27-year-olds. She had prepared hard for 6 weeks. She rehearsed every single possible problem. And she expected her car service at 4:45 sharp exactly as demanded. It did not. At 4:50 her assistant called about a driver family emergency. The car agency had a quiet backup ready named Adrian Cole. He had driven for them before. They promised he was completely reliable, and just 8 minutes away. Madison let out a breath, checked her watch, and decided 8 minutes was barely acceptable. She did not ask anything else about him. Adrian arrived in 7. He arrived without any flashy fanfare, a clean dark car, zero music, and no useless small talk waiting. He simply stepped out to open the trunk for her bags. And she barely even glanced his way. He looked younger than expected, maybe late 20s with a lean, unhurried vibe about him that she quickly dismissed as completely unremarkable. He just wore a plain dark jacket, no tie, clean shoes. Let's look closer. His face had that calm, people mistake for blankness if they aren't paying attention. And Madison, caught up in her own ego, wasn't paying attention at all. He was just a driver. She handed over the address and took the back seat. That route normally should have taken 32 minutes. He navigated flawlessly without touching the dashboard GPS. He took a quiet industrial route, effortlessly dodging 2 massive highway bottlenecks the CEO didn't even know existed. He didn't need to brag. She spent the trip glued to her tablet, firing off business messages, muttering corporate talking points in a constant, low murmur under her breath. He simply drove. When she demanded a temperature change, he quietly obliged without ego. When she took a call and snapped at the air to hold on, he remained perfectly focused. If his quiet mastery bothered her, that would have meant actually noticing the extraordinary man driving. Once she casually glanced at the rearview mirror and briefly caught his steady gaze. For just a fraction of a second. Calm gray, remarkably steady. Locked on the road with a calm focus that felt less like hypervigilance and more like pure patience. She quickly looked back down at her notes. She had already decided he was just an ordinary, invisible corporate employee. Just a guy working a basic job, entirely unexceptional to her high-stakes executive morning. Her big meeting was 40 minutes out, a $7 million contract. She had absolutely no mental space left for anything else. You and I might mistake his deep silence for simple indifference, but it wasn't. Every tiny choice he made, the exact lane, the flawless spacing from the car ahead, the total stillness in his shoulders when a siren wailed somewhere right behind them. It showed a profound discipline so deeply ingrained it required zero effort, just pure instinct. He knew how to observe without staring, to sharply process everything without looking like it, to simply be present in a room without demanding an ounce of attention. It was a rare skill built over years, sharpened in extreme situations that had absolutely nothing to do with basic corporate transit. But those intense years were completely behind him now. Or at least that's what he humbly told himself. Now he just drove. He simply drove. His phone buzzed twice on the center console. He ignored both of the calls. On the third buzz, he checked the screen, and a gentle warmth finally shifted in his stoic eyes. A subtle softening that the CEO noticed over her notes, but wrongly dismissed as totally insignificant. Hitting a red light, he calmly accepted the video call, tilting the screen just slightly. A tiny, sincere voice crackled softly through his phone speaker. "Daddy, I can't find my bunny." That sweet voice belonged to his 6-year-old daughter, Lily Cole. At that exact moment, she stood in a neighbor's doorway, dressed only in her little pajamas. Wearing just one sock, tightly gripping the exact stuffed animal that she had, in reality already found. She just wanted her hero to know about it. Adrian gave a warm, genuine smile, hiding nothing, and said, "She's in your left hand, sweetheart." A short pause followed, then sweet laughter. "Oh." He softly promised he'd be home by afternoon, mentioned the warm oatmeal, and said that Mrs. Patterson next door would check in right at 7. "I know, Daddy," Lily replied. "You and I know that patient tone well," lovingly humoring a great father who always protects her. The call took 45 seconds. Madison heard the whole thing. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the car was silent and the voice carried clearly. She watched him put down his phone. His focus went right back to the road as the light turned green. His face returned to a calm, unreadable mask, pure quiet. Madison logged his calm demeanor as useless data. A young CEO rarely notices what isn't loudly advertised. He had a daughter, and she sounded incredibly happy. He drove like a man who never needs to brag, his inner world perfectly shielded. His personal life stayed completely separate from whatever space he occupied. She assumed this meant nothing. To her, he was just some ordinary replacement driver. His genuine, unforced gentleness with his child didn't impress her. True strength often looks perfectly ordinary to the untrained eye. He remained a lowly employee in her mental hierarchy. She had built a tech startup. She secured a massive meeting 40 competing firms would literally kill to get. She couldn't waste her valuable cognitive bandwidth on the private life of the seemingly average guy hired just to drive her. And he was certainly going to get her there on time. She could already spot the airport terminal signs approaching up ahead. Let's pause here. What she completely missed was the quiet, intense quality of his awareness. The sharp way his eyes scanned the airport entrance as they pulled up. He read the zone like an expert checking a familiar map, silently confirming every detail. Meridian International's departure drop-off stretched out in a long, wide curve of glass and concrete at 6:15 in the morning. It was running at about 70% of its daily capacity. Ground workers in orange vests directed the morning traffic. 2 military transport trucks sat near the far curb, their heavy engines idling quietly. 3 uniformed soldiers stood by the east entrance, holding coffee cups, chatting in low voices. Madison didn't notice any of them. Her mind was totally consumed by her 9 a.m. presentation, obsessing over a procurement document that had bothered her since Tuesday. Adrian pulled the dark sedan to the curb, stopping with effortless, unbragging precision. He stepped out to pop the trunk before she even unbuckled her seatbelt. She stepped out and grabbed the extended handle of her rolling suitcase. She muttered a flat "thank you," treating him like just another invisible service worker. A cold tone that signaled the transaction was completely over. Then she spun toward the airport doors without even glancing at him. She only made it 3 steps before she heard a distinct noise. It wasn't a shout, not a loud, arrogant command either. Just the sound of heavy boots on pavement, multiple pairs stepping with total precision. The sharp, unmistakable staccato of elite military personnel snapping right to attention. Madison's quick pace dropped off without her even realizing she was stopping. You and I know what happens next. Those 3 soldiers by the entrance instantly transformed. They snapped to full attention. Shoulders thrown back. Chins level, arms perfectly rigid. And every single one of them was facing Adrian, the quiet driver she ignored. A sergeant saluting a man whose true greatness needed no introduction. The soldier had a face that learned long ago never to show surprise too easily. Yet his hand snapped up in a salute so crisp and deliberate, it looked entirely rehearsed. The other two followed a half-second later, moving with that perfectly automatic coordination of people reacting to real authority they'd been trained to recognize purely on gut instinct. A fourth soldier suddenly stepped out from the east checkpoint doorway. Drawn by the movement, he froze when he saw the driver raising his own hand in quiet respect. Adrian just stood there beside the open trunk of the sedan. He calmly returned the salute. One clean, unhurried motion followed by the absolute briefest of nods. His expression never shifted, he simply moved to shut the trunk. Madison had stopped walking completely. You and I know true power is quiet. She stood there gripping her suitcase, laptop bag slung over her shoulder, completely motionless for 4 whole seconds. All around her, the ordinary machinery of the terminal simply carried on. A ground crew worker pushed a luggage cart right past them. A yellow taxi ahead of their sedan pulled away from the curb. Overhead, an intercom announced a sudden gate change for a departing flight to Denver. But none of it touched the deep pocket of stillness radiating around this incredibly unassuming man. The quiet driver closing a trunk, and the 4 soldiers saluting him. Madison had flown out of this exact airport dozens of times. She'd walked through military checkpoints, exclusive VIP terminals, and secure halls with high-level contractors. She knew exactly what a standard polite courtesy gesture looked like. And she definitely knew what a strictly formal military salute looked like. What she just saw was the real deal, not a casual wave, not a simple nod. It was profound institutional respect, so sharp and unanimous, it couldn't possibly be a spontaneous reaction. Those guards knew exactly who he was the second they saw him. They reacted to his quiet presence the way highly trained professionals respond to serious rank. Not because anyone barked an order, but because true greatness commands respect without saying a word. Adrian just strolled around to the driver's side without ever rushing himself. He briefly glanced over the car roof, looking directly in her direction. And for just a fleeting moment, the morning light caught his gray eyes so clearly they didn't look like the eyes of some regular hired driver, they looked like the eyes of a man who had witnessed incredible things, quietly carrying the heavy weight of every single memory. Then he slid into the car. The dark sedan simply pulled away from the busy curb. Madison Clark stood frozen on the sidewalk of Meridian International Airport and finally began to truly ask herself who on earth she had just been riding in that car with. She made it inside the airport terminal before she finally stopped, pretending she was fine. At the check-in counter, her hands went through the motions, mechanically passing over her passport and flight documents. But her mind was miles away, sprinting down the sidewalk. The image of those 4 saluting soldiers played on a loop she couldn't turn off or control. The airline agent muttered something about her seat assignment, and she just blurted out, "That's fine." Completely failing to register the actual question, the confused agent repeated it. Madison blinked, focused up, answered, and kept moving, reaching the loud security lane. Let's listen closely here. She caught 2 airport workers near the luggage scanner talking in hushed, nervous whispers. She distinctly heard the name Cole, and her head snapped around instantly. The younger of the 2 workers, a woman wearing a simple ground operations lanyard. She whispered something to her coworker, shaking her head with an expression caught right between pure awe and deep, unsettling discomfort. We know that exact look. The look of remembering a silent legend they cannot quite speak out loud. Madison missed the rest. The 2 workers scattered the second they noticed the young CEO. She cleared security, stepping into the military VIP zone. That hallway leading to the departure lounges, built for government brass and defense contractors. A uniformed guard stood at the inner checkpoint. Tall, late 40s. He had that deep stillness born from 25 years of silent, unbragging discipline. He checked her executive badge, then looked up. His eyes drifted past her shoulder, staring outside toward the drop-off zone that was now completely hidden. A deep, unspoken respect sat right there on his face. She questioned him with that bold CEO directness that usually got her way, demanding to know the identity of her simple driver. The veteran officer just stared at her silently. His face stayed still, but something behind his eyes quietly shifted and locked into place. The look of a man deciding which secrets to share and which to bury. "A former serviceman," he replied calmly. "We recognized him." Madison pushed back, saying it looked like much more. The veteran guard held her stare for exactly 2 seconds. "Yes, ma'am," he said smoothly, "it was." Then he returned her pass, quietly shifting his focus to the next person in line. She chose not to push. Not from a lack of executive instinct, she built her company by knowing exactly when to squeeze. But his steady tone gave her a clear, undeniable warning right there. That a public hallway guard was never going to spill the true legend of her seemingly ordinary driver. The greatness was real, it truly existed. It simply wasn't here, and certainly not right now. She shoved the mystery into her mental folder for later corporate problems and marched right along. Reaching the VIP entrance, she stopped and threw a thoughtful glance back at the main terminal. The drop-off area sat as a blurry mix of glass and gray morning fog far down the hall. Her unassuming driver was long gone. Those 4 stunned soldiers had melted back into the checkpoint. Everything looked completely normal, exactly as it always did. But a deep, unshakable doubt crept into her chest, and she just could not ignore it. She had sized the man up as a nobody in under 30 seconds of meeting him. So confident in her arrogant assessment. The problem, you and I see, was that true greatness never brags, leaving her totally blind. Her 9 a.m. meeting with Hargrove. Defense took place inside a highly secure airport conference room. A sleek glass room up on the 2nd floor wrapped in strict federal security. Defense contractor badges required at the door. Plus a tarmac view that made the whole corporate scene feel like a movie. The Hargrove executives were exactly as she had confidently profiled them. Picture her, direct, detail-oriented, and highly skeptical. She executed perfectly. She knew every single number. She countered the tough questions, delivering Section 4 with a corporate swagger that surprised even herself. The summit ended with firm handshakes and a conditional timeline for the next phase. By any modern corporate standard, it was a triumph. That big win should have energized her. Instead, she stood in the atrium holding her coffee, mind stuck on that sidewalk, 4 soldiers saluting and a trunk silently snapping shut. She dialed her assistant and asked around. She wanted every detail on a contracted driver registered with the agency simply as Adrian Cole. 20 minutes later, her assistant returned with almost nothing. A valid commercial driving license and a clean record. A quiet home address in the residential district east of downtown. And a work history that began exactly 2.5 years ago. Before that, a blank gap listed merely as prior service. No branch, no rank, 0 loud bragging. Her assistant tried pulling deeper files but hit a massive wall. Not just a missing record, but a heavy, deliberate seal, like someone powerful took his whole file and permanently locked it away. She headed back to the checkpoint hallway using a fake excuse, cornering one of the airport's senior operations staff near the secure door. She asked about him again, much more carefully. She framed it as a security concern over the morning's contracted driving service. The older woman, mid-50s, 23 years on staff, studied Madison's face closely, realizing the young executive was trapped somewhere between burning curiosity and genuine concern. "All I can tell you," the older woman carefully replied, "is that he is someone we never forget. And most folks who actually know what I mean are not in any position to explain his quiet greatness to those who do not already know." Madison processed the riddle. "He did something huge," she said. "He did far more than something," the staffer replied, staring quietly out the window. "He sacrificed everything, and because true legends rarely brag, he just walked away from the glory completely." She paused. "That is all I will say. It was honestly enough. You and I know the feeling. Not a complete picture, but enough to shatter the arrogant assumptions she already had." The CEO walked back to the atrium, standing in the busy morning traffic. She finally let herself reflect in a deeply humble way she almost never allowed during her strict working hours. No hidden agenda. Without an arrogant, pre-drafted corporate conclusion just waiting to be stubbornly confirmed. She had certainly met veterans before. She hired former military contractors and employed men bragging about their high-level security clearances. She attended serious briefings where arrogant men showed off the controlled, rigid stillness of people trained in dangerous environments she would never personally witness. She understood the loud vocabulary of service, at least the shiny corporate surface of it. But what she witnessed on that sidewalk today was not some cheap, rehearsed vocabulary. It was quiet instinct, the rare kind that ignores boasting completely, speaking only through humble posture, timing, and the invisible way a group of hardened soldiers instantly react to a humble man whose massive achievements can never be awarded by some flashy corporate title. She spent years proudly building her startup on the arrogant premise that she could easily read any room. You and I know true greatness is silent. She realized she walked in today and read him completely wrong. She kept thinking about how the driver simply returned that soldier's salute. One perfectly smooth, completely unbothered motion. Then he just shut the trunk, treating both actions like they were exactly the same. As if being quietly recognized by four combat veterans and getting back behind the wheel were just equally ordinary daily tasks, demanding the exact same level of care. For a truly great man, maybe they were. Now she was never meant to see his file. Let's trace how she found out. It arrived through tiny coincidences that, looking back now, felt less like random luck and way more like destiny forcing her eyes open. A representative from the Hargrove Defense Group, a retired Army colonel named Gerald Briggs. He worked as a security consultant, but had this terrible absent-minded habit of leaving highly classified papers sitting on open boardroom tables. He simply forgot a private folder when his crew packed up after their pitch. It was exceptionally thin, barely a few pages. Madison's assistant scooped it up with the leftover meeting notes before even realizing what he had. He took it straight to Madison, totally unsure if they should mail it back or wait for the colonel to call. The young CEO grabbed it, fully intending to drop it off at the security desk. She believed that lie for exactly 45 seconds before flipping it open. Officially, nothing was classified. Just some standard summary notes. Operational background details, meant for the Hargrove meeting's introduction. The sort of briefing paper a guy like Briggs writes, to remember the actual human lives wrapped up in a dry corporate contract. Mostly it was incredibly boring, military unit numbers and timeline dots. Cold outcomes measured in procurement. Words that turned incredible human bravery into plain corporate results. But exactly 3 pages deep, one specific name jumped out. Adrian Cole, former rank captain. His unit was listed only by a strange number she couldn't recognize. But she guessed it was the kind that never sought attention. Served 7 full years, status honorably discharged by his own choice 3 years ago. The notes beside his name were incredibly brief. Primary field commander during Operation Sinclair Ridge. Result: mission critical success, casualties absolutely 0 on our side. Consequence: guaranteed protected status for 48 different personnel over a 72-hour period completely surrounded by active threats. Then, scribbled right in the margin in Briggs's messy handwriting. Let's look closely here. She read one single line 3 times before believing it was real. Walked away completely, quietly raised a flag to keep his family safe. We deeply respect that. The young CEO dropped the folder, staring out the window at the airport tarmac in absolute silence. Operation Sinclair Ridge. She had never heard the name, but she knew corporate jargon well enough to see the real heroism hiding underneath. 48 lives, 72 agonizing hours dodging death, an absolutely critical mission. You never see numbers like that on some standard military exercise. These were the brutal markers of a massive disaster, the kind of nightmare scenario that absolutely demanded one quiet hero to walk into the fire and hold the line, just so 48 others could survive. Then she recalled that simple phone call at the red light. That tiny voice asking about a lost stuffed rabbit. 45 seconds of pure patience and warmth, the word sweetheart. Spoken with such gentle care, so unlike his stern exterior, it felt like unlocking a hidden door to the real man. She thought about his highly classified military records. The woman claiming he sacrificed it all, that small note in the margin. Walked away from greatness afterward, raised a shield to protect his family. She pictured little Lily. The truth finally came together. You and I know how that feels, realizing we've misjudged a quiet person for far too long. He didn't walk away from the military over failure. He didn't leave due to injury, age, or losing his faith. He stepped down because the mission demanded he become totally invisible. And staying invisible meant his little girl would grow up with a ghost instead of a dad. He chose his daughter instead. He picked a humble East Residential District apartment and a basic commercial driver's license, a driving gig demanding zero glory, just ensuring he made it home by afternoon. He valued that sweet voice at a red light far above prestige or power. Madison Clark saw a quiet man in a dark jacket and dismissed him as just an ordinary employee. She gave him her address like tossing a piece of trash, not even looking. Without even thinking. Completely ignoring that the humble man taking it possessed an incredibly deep, complex inner world. A history far more profound than anything on her corporate schedule. She had been completely wrong. Not just a simple mistake, but a total failure to see his true character. She missed far more than a minor background detail. She misjudged the man's entire worth. She gripped his file for another long moment. Then she slipped it into an envelope, writing Colonel Briggs's name neatly across the front, and passed it back to the desk attendant for return. She slowly sat back down. The airport terminal buzzed with normal noise, but her arrogant posture had completely vanished into something softer. She sat there stripped of her ego, holding far less certainty and much more awareness. Her big meeting with Hargrove Defense was set for 3. Another round to check the tech specs she had handed in 2 weeks earlier. She assumed it was just a quick formality, confirming settled details and breezing through the launch schedules. Well, she was totally wrong about that too. The defense contractors showed up carrying 3 laptops and thick stacks of printed spreadsheets. You know that tense energy, the look of experts who just found a major problem. The issue was hiding in the supply chain data. The exact software architecture her company pitched for Phase 1. A hidden miscalculation inside the core routing algorithm. Not a world-ending mistake, but a highly precise one. A stubborn flaw that defense tech reviewers are trained to hunt down and totally refuse to let slide. If those stats weren't fixed by end of the day, that smooth project timeline from earlier would completely fall apart. The $1 million contract would vanish. Madison had to step up. She dialed up her engineering lead on a secure video feed, dissecting the flagged data. They spotted the error in 12 minutes and started building a real-time fix. The Hargrove tech team watched it all unfold with the patient skepticism you and I feel when watching companies try to fake their way out of messes. Her lead engineer was talking through the live correction. His method hit a wall with a variable he just couldn't crack. A third node sequencing conflict kept forcing a cascade error, no matter how they tweaked inputs. He went completely silent. The conference room air grew incredibly heavy. Meanwhile, Adrian Cole stood quietly out in the hallway. To Madison, he was just the ordinary employee who drove her to the airport. He'd parked in short term. Now he waited in the atrium, holding coffee, projecting that absolute stillness he always carried. From his seat, he had a clear view of the glass conference room. He wasn't staring, but voices easily drifted across the open atrium space. Especially that tight, nervous tension that technical teams get when things go totally sideways. When Madison paced into the hall to take the call off speaker, he heard it. Not every single word, but absolutely enough. He patiently waited for her to hang up the phone. Then he just plainly stated without any preamble the cascade error. It is probably rooted in the third node sequencing priority. If your algorithm reads simultaneous inputs as sequential, the entire priority queue completely collapses. Madison lowered her phone and simply stared at her driver. Try assigning a timestamp buffer between those input layers, he quietly continued. 200 millisecond separation. That forces the system to see them as separate events, not concurrent data. The cascade entirely stops. This is what you and I need to remember. The greatest minds never brag. He spoke with the flat certainty of someone who never dresses up an answer. Then he grabbed his coffee, casually shifting his gaze back to the empty room. She quietly stepped back inside. She relayed it to her lead. 40 seconds of dead silence followed. Nothing but the frantic clacking of keystrokes. Finally, her lead engineer slowly admitted, "That works. That fix actually works." Across the table, the Hargrove tech reviewer leaned in, studied the fresh projection, and gave a nod. The crushing stress in the room instantly vanished. Once the meeting wrapped, she stepped back into the hallway. Adrian waited right there, same quiet posture, same calm stillness. "Where did you learn how to do that?" she asked. He met her gaze with perfectly steady, calm gray eyes. "I used to handle systems where cascade errors weren't an option," he softly replied. No showing off. He simply grabbed his jacket and told her the car was waiting in Lot C. The actual security incident went down at 4:47. Now stick with me here. Crises don't start with sirens, but with a tiny specific error that sharp minds catch long before the general alarms start ringing. A random maintenance cart, parked near the east checkpoint at a slightly bizarre angle. The cart's side panel hung open, clearly out of its normal operational position. My driver Adrian spotted it 30 meters out while walking me toward the terminal exit. He didn't say a word. He never broke his stride. But he seamlessly shifted our path, guiding me away from the cart's sightline without making it seem like we had changed direction at all. His adjustment was so perfectly subtle, I didn't even notice until 2 minutes later when I realized we were at the south exit instead of the east. Then he quietly excused himself. He mentioned needing to check something, calmly asking me to wait right by the pillar near the south entrance. He spoke quietly, showing absolutely zero urgency, sounding like he was just noting a minor logistical detail. I started to question him but stopped, completely disarmed by the unique way he spoke. It was a specific kind of calm, not casual in the slightest but entirely the opposite. The intense focus of someone managing massive amounts of information all at the same time. That hidden authority made me stand by the pillar without arguing. Picture this. What happened over the next 9 minutes was totally fragmented and confusing from my perspective. An airport security officer suddenly materialized from the east checkpoint. 2 military guards approached from the south corridor at a swift pace that wasn't exactly running. But it definitely wasn't walking. They quickly surrounded the maintenance cart, doing it entirely without any shouting. Zero visible panic or escalation that might draw any unnecessary attention. Meaning these experts knew perfectly well that visible chaos only makes a tense situation worse. A second security tone echoed briefly in the east wing, 2 sharp pulses, then dead silence. Then the PA system announced a supposed routine maintenance delay for an east side gate, which obviously was not a routine maintenance delay. And my driver Adrian was commanding it. Not because anyone had officially handed him authority in there, but simply because of the confident way he moved through. The sharp directness of his instructions to the armed officer. The precise hand gestures he used to establish perimeter positions. The way the military guards responded to his silent commands. He built a command structure from what was, seconds prior, a severely uncoordinated, dangerous situation. He spoke to the officer in a tone way too low for me to catch. But I saw the guard's reaction, a tight nod and absolute immediate compliance. The crisp body language of someone who completely understood and moved. When a third responder arrived holding a detection kit, Adrian was already stationed right there, pointing at the exact section of the panel they needed to address first, the device. Just a malfunctioning electronic unit from a recently serviced piece of airport ground equipment. Not an actual threat, though the first few tense minutes hadn't confirmed that at all. The whole thing was isolated and cleared in under 8 minutes. The public announcement about the East Gate was quickly retracted. The corridor slowly reopened. Let me tell you, when Adrian walked back, he found me exactly where he left me. His jacket still gripped in his hand, his calm expression entirely unchanged from this morning. "We can go whenever you're ready," he said. I just stared back at him. "What just happened?" I asked. "A false alarm," he said. Handled. She stared down the east corridor. Airport staff scattered with forced calm, people trained to fake a sense of order long before danger is gone. Her gaze shifted to the military. The officer who'd instantly obeyed Adrian's subtle gesture. A captain who, on literally any other day of the week, would have loudly claimed absolute authority here. Yet there he stood, happily taking a back seat to a man whose quiet brilliance demanded instant respect without bragging. Finally, she looked at Adrian Cole. She stared at him, really saw him for the very first time since she got in his car. Ever judge someone? The ordinary driver label she'd slapped on him at dawn was completely gone now. What she saw wasn't the ordinary, invisible employee she had previously imagined. It was the man he truly was. Patient, precise, quietly radiating an immense power she didn't even have the words to describe. Colonel Gerald Briggs tracked them down 20 minutes later in the atrium. A massive guy in his early 60s, gray buzz cut, carrying himself with that stiff military spine that never relaxes, even in jeans. He marched in, spotted Adrian quietly standing by those south windows, and just froze dead in his tracks. An absolute involuntary halt, a pure second of utter shock. Then he rushed across that room, completely ignoring the wealthy CEO. He stopped right in front of the humble driver. Adrian shook his hand calmly. "I heard what you just did," Briggs muttered. "Sergeant Wallace told me. Said you organized the response in under 90 seconds. It was a manageable situation." Adrian softly replied, "Only manageable because you stepped up and managed it." Briggs gripped his hand hard for another second, then released. He finally turned to Madison. "Mrs. Clark, do you know who this man is?" She honestly admitted she was just starting to find out. Briggs glanced at Adrian. His look held a silent question, asking for permission to reveal his legend. The humble driver just gave a tiny, indifferent shrug. Briggs took that as a green light, turning back to the stunned CEO. "Listen to this closely. Adrian Cole commanded an elite ops team for 7 years. He was arguably the single most lethal field commander we ever had. Not just for crushing missions, but because he quietly made sure his team made it home. Operation Sinclair Ridge was the brutal fight that ended his career. 48 soldiers were left totally pinned down, trapped at an extraction point for 72 hours under fire. Adrian held the line entirely alone, no backup, no complaints. No ammo drops, no rescue for the first 40 hours. Briggs paused, choking up. Every single one of those 48 kids came home alive. That's impossible math. That is beyond a miracle. Madison just stood there, totally speechless. He quietly filed for his honorable discharge 8 months later. Briggs kept explaining. He never asked for medals. Didn't sell out to private security firms like everyone else does, even though it pays millions. And those flashy mercenary companies would have killed to hire a guy like him. He just asked to go, signed the basic forms, and quietly vanished. You and I both know why we let him walk. True greatness earns the right to fade away." Briggs looked at Adrian, a man whose daughter was just 4. For 2 brutal years, he rarely saw home for more than 3 weeks at a stretch. So he just walked away. The airport buzzed around them, rolling bags, booming overhead announcements. Somewhere a kid shouted a question with zero self-consciousness. Yet, none of that noise breached the edge of their conversation. Briggs explained the morning salute. Those soldiers truly recognized him. When combat veterans cross paths with someone who carried a very specific, heavy kind of command. True authority isn't about rank. It's about what you carry and how quietly you bear it. Their reaction isn't mandatory protocol, it is pure, absolute recognition. It is a completely different thing. Adrian just watched the window. Outside, a jet crawled slowly across the gray tarmac, lights blinking in the fading afternoon. Madison suddenly reflected on that morning. She remembered shoving the address at him, barely making eye contact. She replayed how she had muttered thank you, her back already half turned away. The sheer corporate arrogance baked into her posture before she even finished speaking. She cringed at the snap judgment she had made automatically. So completely confident, the way she usually judged everyday people. You and I have both made that mistake, assuming he was just some uncomplicated, ordinary employee. Then she remembered Lily at that long red light, holding a stuffed rabbit in one hand, displaying 45 seconds of absolute quiet patience. He chose this life, she realized aloud. Briggs simply nodded. He chose this. Adrian finally turned around. His face remained completely composed and unhurried, never needing to boast. But Madison caught something in his eyes she had totally missed before. Or maybe she had seen it, but couldn't read it. No trace of bitterness or arrogant pride, just quiet power. The absolute peace of a man who stepped away from power years ago and never regretted letting it go. A quiet moment passed. Then 2 more uniformed soldiers marched into the busy East Corridor. Sergeant Wallace and a security officer stepped out of the crowd, heading directly toward their small group. They stopped at a deeply respectful distance from Adrian. The sergeant raised his hand, The second officer mirrored him. A crisp, formal salute held for 3 seconds, cutting right through the chaos of a civilian airport. Right in front of a wealthy CEO who had spent her entire morning treating this hero like dirt. Unfazed, Adrian returned the salute just as he had earlier. One smooth, humble, unhurried motion. He slowly lowered his hand. "Thank you, Sergeant," he replied. "Sir," Wallace answered, "that was everything." They turned and walked away. You and I can picture Madison standing in that airport atrium, suddenly struck by an emotion she never allowed herself in business. Not pure embarrassment, not exactly guilt, but a crushing clarity that hits the second you realize how completely blind you have been. Realizing how arrogant your assumptions were, and how true greatness never needs to announce itself to the room. She quietly asked him to wait. He waited, perfectly calm, while she walked back to Colonel Briggs to finally finish a conversation that desperately needed finishing. The final contracts and formal handshakes. Those expected corporate courtesies her major business success had bought. Stepping back out into the quiet atrium. The driver stood right where she left him. Coat draped over his arm, watching planes. He looked as unbothered as ever. True confidence rarely rushes. He was a man deeply used to waiting, having made absolute peace with stillness years ago. She lingered beside him for a moment before finally speaking. "I owe you an apology," she admitted. She confessed, "I judged exactly who you were without knowing you. I treated you like mere background noise." He met her eyes. He did not brush it off with a polite excuse. He skipped those empty social reflexes that would have let her off the hook without doing the hard emotional work. Instead, he offered that steady, gray-eyed stare. A truly grounded person lets honest words just hang in the open air. "You only saw exactly what you expected to see," he finally replied. "Most do," he admitted. "That is no excuse," she countered. "No," he calmly agreed. "It isn't." A brief pause, "but it is a start." Her smartphone buzzed violently. She killed the alert without looking. "Your daughter," she noted. "Lily. You walked away from everything." A quiet shift softened his face, matching that brief, pure warmth she had noticed earlier at the traffic light. It was the kind of vulnerability that reveals real greatness, showing a man entirely stripped of pretense. "I left something behind for her," he said. He added, "I also came home for her, completely different choices." The CEO had absolutely no comeback. True wisdom rarely demands an answer. He grabbed his coat. "Your flight board's at 7:15, he stated. "I can drop you at the terminal in 20 minutes, he offered, "if you want a quick dinner first." His tone and steady delivery matched exactly what he had offered at 5:30 in the dark morning. Grounded, simple, and completely lacking arrogance. "Let's look at this together." The only difference was how she listened. Now she heard the pure competence, the quiet reliability and sharp, emotional intelligence that spoke entirely for itself. Not through flashy corporate bragging, but through humble, flawless acts of service. She gladly agreed to dinner. They ate inside an airport restaurant, buried under way too much harsh lighting. Facing a remarkably average food menu, he just ordered a black coffee. She picked at a meal she hardly ate, while they discussed simple, ordinary things. He asked one single question about her major Hargrove deal. She gave him a completely honest answer. He listened the way remarkable leaders do, with total, silent, unbragging focus, making her feel like her thoughts were the only things worth hearing anywhere. Boarding her flight at 7:10, she took one final look toward the terminal. That unassuming dark sedan was completely gone. She lingered inside the jet bridge just a little longer than strictly necessary. Finally taking her seat, she flipped through her work notes, and for the first time in forever, her mind ignored the corporate strategy, the startup revenue numbers, and future meetings. You and I know true greatness is quiet. She finally understood seeing someone's humble reality, not their expected corporate role. Have you ever noticed the quiet greatness that exists, even without an audience? In the weeks after her drive, Madison Clark's team noticed a shift they couldn't quite put their finger on. It wasn't loud. She didn't make the kind of grand gestures that demand everyone's applause. It was far more subtle, a real shift in how she actually paid attention. A quiet change in how she walked through spaces where her employees were grinding away. She actually started showing up to meetings a bit early, which was totally new. and she spent that time just observing people instead of studying her notes. She actually learned the names of the building's cleaning crew. Then she learned who the junior logistics team on the lower floor were, and the night shift guards she had walked past 200 times without ever noticing. She asked people questions that had nothing to do with work, and she really listened. She stopped believing a person's job title was the full sum of their worth. During one of her first big company speeches after sealing the Hargrove deal, she dropped a line that her senior executives would quote for years to come. She told them, "I've been in the habit of evaluating people by what they're doing when I first meet them. I'm going to try instead to ask what they're capable of, and to understand that those two things are often very far apart." The crowd applauded. She never told anyone where that wisdom actually came from. Adrian Cole kept driving for the agency until the season ended, and then he took a quiet part-time consulting job at a small security logistics firm. They tracked him down through channels he never fully explained to curious people. He worked 3 days a week. The remaining 4 belonged entirely to Lily. On Saturdays, they hit the farmers market up in the north end of town, where she loudly haggled over fruit prices, while he just carried the bags in silence. Every single Sunday morning he cooked oatmeal, and she playfully complained about it, a warm little ritual that neither of them would ever dream of breaking. He didn't chase applause. He never bothered to build a public profile. He never showed up to events or joined groups to build the kind of massive presence his past reputation would have handed him effortlessly. Instead, he lived completely within the exact small radius he chose. Small, careful, warm, and perfectly deliberate. The few who had served with him always knew where to find him. You and I would probably pass him in a grocery store and just see a quiet man in plain clothes, forming an impression of him that was just completely incomplete. And he had decided that was perfectly fine, because there is massive dignity in being underestimated and simply choosing not to brag. Adrian Cole deeply understood this. He was completely at peace with the ordinary guy the rest of the world saw. The unremarkable regular guy, the background character, just a driver in a dark jacket. He wore that disguise easily. It cost him nothing important, but it protected a quiet life that had once cost him everything. Late one afternoon in early November, as the city skies turned gray and a low amber light filtered through the tall buildings, they walked with that quiet certainty of true giants, right where they needed to be. Everyone else walking by just saw a normal dad and his kid. You and I know strangers never see the heavy burdens true leaders once carried, or the quiet sacrifices they made to stand right there. Yet real power needs no megaphone. It echoed quietly in every single step and every soft word spoken. It showed in his grip, strong enough to keep her safe, gentle enough to let her fly. Anyone who served beside him would spot that silent, humble strength right away. True heroes always do.